Hello and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duff Network, where we dive deep into Wildbow's most forgotten work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Signature 8.4, which again starts with our still nameless protagonist here, waking up in an armchair in Sandra Duchamp's house as Sandra kind of cooks breakfast.
Yeah, and I think we forgot to touch on this last episode, but I loved this little detail about how Sandra doesn't have a couch for people to sleep on, because just having a couch sort of implies that there is a couch to sleep on, and she doesn't want to give off that vibe. She basically implies that the only other person she's really planning on letting in here is, I assume she was referencing Jeremy, who obviously wouldn't need a separate bed.
Yeah, it's a cool little bit. Again, Sandra is not used to being a gracious host in this situation, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's sort of a tick in the, this isn't what she would normally do. Like, it sets that tone of, there's something amiss, or there's something she must want out of this, because this isn't something she would normally does.
Yeah, and I suppose we'll hit that question of what she's getting out of this a bit more later.
Yeah.
I want to call out a line that I just thought was a very beautiful bit of writing near the start of this chapter, where Maggie thinks, can't say that name, where our point of view thinks, her thoughts walked the razor's edge of inspiration, and there wasn't much footing to be had, if any. Which is some really nice prose, and also gets you into her frame of mind of like, okay, she's a bit more relaxed compared to, her goblin escape last chapter, but, she's still, she's definitely still kind of like close to breaking.
Yeah, well, she's moved on from, these monsters are attacking me, I'm going to die any second, to now she's still, and she can contemplate the fact that she's literally coming undone, and she may only have days, hours, to live.
Yeah.
We're not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know how sure she is.
But you're right. Where's Isadora when you need her for some expiration date data dumping?
I don't know. Isadora didn't really give the very good details to Blake on that. I don't know how helpful she actually is.
Maybe she wouldn't be helpful.
But yeah, no, it really does get you immediately into this mindset of how she can't actually relax, because she's on the verge of a panic attack and she's barely holding it together, and that is a completely reasonable place to be given her situation.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I don't think we see her, we see the cracks inside her head a bit, but I feel like we don't see them too much. I feel like she's actually holding it together remarkably well.
Considering, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so the other thing that we get in this kind of early part of the chapter is we get kind of our POV spying on Sandra as she's having these kind of little domestic interactions with Hilda, her familiar, which I really like. It's just it's a very fun kind of weird slice of life thing, watching a practitioner and their troll interact.
Yeah, I mean, it's just some fun with the setting, like the world of Pact, really. I think we've gotten a handful of things like this with Blake and Evan, just sort of all quite domestic or casual.
Yeah.
Other practitioner interactions are just fun because there's something off about them, because there's always something a bit off about the others, but it's often in a fun way.
Yeah, and I think it also helps to humanize Sandra here, right?
Yeah.
It kind of does give this domestic life vibe, which I think is not something we often see from Sandra, but I don't know, yeah, it paints her in a very interesting light, I think.
Yeah, well, because apart from Hilda, she's sort of living alone, and this really counters any vibes that would be giving off. She doesn't seem like the cottage in the middle of the forest alone type anymore.
Yeah, I maybe there's a contrast that I'm not sure if we're going to talk about between Sandra and Crone Mara, and they're two sides of the same coin. No, I don't think that's the case, but no, you're right. And yeah, I guess I never really thought of her as like a lonely kind of person, but well, back in her interlude, I guess we did, right? So maybe this is kind of countering that narrative a bit, kind of setting up that she is kind of in a pretty good place and having a pretty happy domestic life, even though it's probably not the life that she planned for herself.
Yeah, I think she's made do is probably what I assume she would she would think.
Yeah.
I imagine that's how Sandra would put it.
Yeah. So our nameless girl kind of still feels pretty out of place in Sandra's house, right? But is accepting of her hospitality and kind of does start to seek her advice on this whole situation.
Yeah, and there's an interesting bit early on where Sandra says, I do have clothes from when I was about your age. I grew up in this house and left it behind when I moved to Toronto. I've never had cause to get rid of it. Which is like, there's a sort of subtle transition from talking about the clothes, or the clothes being the subject, to the
house.
The house.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting because there's all this stuff like Sandra makes out a few different times throughout this chapter that, you know, oh, you can just have this, like it's just here. I just haven't bothered to get rid of it. And I don't know if I buy it. It seems she keeps going out of her way to be like, oh, I just, you know, had no reason to get rid of it. It just seems very forced.
You think she's being overly casual?
Yeah, I think she's trying to mask some added generosity with apathy or something.
Yeah, because I guess it's interesting. It definitely gives you the idea that she's not really used to playing this role as well, right? Being a kind of a provider, being a mother of sorts, right? It doesn't seem like she takes supernaturally to it. But I have to say, she's pretty kind of composed. She very... I think the other thing that we see is she cooks herself, you know, a pretty extravagant breakfast. Or she says it's for herself. Maybe there is a bit of her putting on a show for Maggie, but you definitely get the vibe that she's kind of lives a meticulous, composed Duchamp life.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there are a number of points in this chapter where the story kind of goes out of its way to contrast Maggie and Sandra a bit. You know, we've got the cranberry juice incident coming up, obviously, and then my other favorite one is when Sandra's like, okay, now we need some blood. I'm going to go get a needle, and Maggie just... oh, not Maggie. Ex-Maggie. Just like bites into her thumm.
Yeah.
And
Classic.
And Sandra's just a bit like, oh, shit, okay.
Yeah, okay, that'll do. Yeah.
I think Sandra in this whole bit to me comes across as quite genuine. Well, you know, we're talking about how she's all very Duchampy, but...
Yeah, no.
Like, overall, I still think she comes across as very genuine. Like, it's almost like those mistakes make out, like things like the cranberry juice and stuff, make it seem like she's not putting it on and she's not trying to win Maggie over in a super sus way. She's just kind of doing her thing.
Yeah, I like the cranberry juice mix up as well because it shows that she is fallible, right? Like it shows that she this is, I guess, a bit of an insane thing to say, but it shows that she doesn't know everything about Maggie and hasn't like prepared perfectly for this moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, she's not trying to win her over super fakely. She's just like, oh, you asked for cranberry juice, here's some cranberry juice. And it's like, oh, you wanted the sugary version.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, Podrick would know which kind of cranberry juice she wanted, right? Like, Podrick would have prepared the exact right kind of cranberry juice, because of course he would have, because he has everything down to a T, where Sandra, yeah, she's fallible.
Yep.
However, of course, since this is Pact, I can't ever say something like that without thinking, or maybe it's a double bluff.
Oh, yes.
And she knows that we're thinking that.
No, it crossed my mind as well. Like, I'm so paranoid these days with everything here. It's great.
Yeah. I definitely feel the same way. I definitely feel like Sandra is, and this was the same thing when we were in her head for her interlude. She's very endearing. Yeah, I'm definitely kind of on Team Sandra here.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, when she talks about making a play for Lord in a bit, like, I'm sure we're about to get there, but it's just, like, you know, compared to the other choices, I find it hard not to take sides.
Yeah, well, so that's Sandra's big Machiavellian plan, I suppose, that she reveals to ex-Maggie here, that she's kind of intentionally being good to our POV so that when Sandra eventually has the opportunity to make her play for lordship of Jacob's Bell, at the very least, our POV will kind of be neutral to her or kind of think that she's the right person for the job and support her.
Yeah, and it's a good vote of confidence in our POV that Sandra thinks it's worth this effort, right?
I don't know. I kind of land closer to what ex-Maggie thought, which is, oh, you must be desperate if you're turning to me. And kind of reflecting on it, it's like, yeah, who there aren't any good independent players to get on side, right? There's ex-Maggie, there's Blake, I mean ex-Blake, I guess. He's obviously, even when he was in the picture, not really someone that anyone wants on their side. Maybe the Witch Hunters are a potential neutral party, but they seem pretty like intent on staying neutral. So if you're trying to make a play to get people on side, there aren't that many people to go for.
Yeah, I guess it's just between this and, you know, I brought up last episode how Podrig's instructions to the goblins seemed a little too specific. Like, I'm wondering if this is one of those things where it's like everyone sort of knows if she survives, if she finds herself, she'll be stronger for it. Like, it'll be one of those things where she's overcome a very monumental and important thing. I mean, she's on a literal quest to find herself in this arc, which is great.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where if she manages to find it, it'll be so reinforced that maybe she'll get some pretty impressive power boosts. So it might be one of those things where a lot of people are doing this stuff because if she survives, she's going to be a more important player than she was before.
Yeah, I think that's fair. At the very least, she's kind of, you know, desperation breeds a certain kind of drive to improve yourself, right? So even if there's not a explicit power
arcs
boost,
1 to 7.
Yeah, exactly, right. Even if there's not a specific power boost that she gets from that, like, she's kind of gonna get an inherent power boost just from being in a situation where she needs to gain power to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not quite sure whether Sandra is actually keen on Maggie or if it's just a kind of like gonna make every play that I can kind of deal.
Yeah. Could be both. I mean, that's the standard Pactism, right?
Yeah, sure.
There's also one bit I want to call out where Sandra says the name Maggie Holt in reference to what's going on in Toronto.
Yeah.
And our POV thinks to herself, it felt weird hearing the name spoken like that. It should have felt weird because it was familiar to her, but it wasn't. And like, I originally went to write that this is the most horrifying part of the chapter, but then I remembered the second half, and so I won't say that. But it like this is like a bit that really sort of got to me because it's like this thing that's happened to her is affecting her now as well. Like she has lost her connection to the name Maggie Holt, which is that's kind of terrifying, like existentially. Yeah, that it's manipulating her as much as it's manipulating the rest of the universe.
Yeah, I kind of contextualize this in my head as like, you know how you kind of are very good at recognizing the sound of your own name, right? Like you'll hear something that sounds kind of like your own name and you'll hear that out of a conversation that you didn't hear any other words from. And it's like Maggie has lost that ability from her own name. And now I guess if someone says Maggie near Podrick, he'll kind of turn around instinctively. It's such a... It's so strange. It's so conceptually strange.
Yeah, but to me it ups the violation because up until now it was affecting her external connections, but she was still her, and now we learn it's affecting her as well. So it kind of, to me, ups the effects even more.
Yeah, fair.
But yeah, so I mean, going back to Sandra's whole speech about how she wants to be, the Lord of Jacob's Bell as her consolation prize because it didn't work out in Toronto.
Yep.
One of the things she brings up is how Laird is really trapped where he is, and she actually thinks he's kind of miserable as the head of the Bohème family because he's very trapped. And I mean, like, that's kind of a big development because we were under the impression it was the opposite. Because
based
of
on
Eamon's interlude.
Yeah.
So Sandra doesn't give me the impression that she's wrong. Like, obviously, one option is this is a complete misread by Sandra, but I don't feel like that's what's happening. So, I think this must mean that for whatever reason, Eamon didn't go ahead with what he was talking about with Rose Senior.
Yeah, or at least it didn't work out how he was expecting, right?
Yeah, something happened. My guess would be that Rose Senior did something that made Eamon change his mind, and maybe that's why Laird holds a particular grudge towards the Thorburns, because he could see that as Rose Senior having taken away his potential freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting. But there's, you know what it occurs to me is that there's a potential that this plan is more of a slower burn than we thought, and instead of it being to free Laird, it's to free whatever Owen or whatever other Bahames there are another generation down. Because thinking about it, we have got them kind of starting to seek their own independence from the family and set up their own deals and stuff, and follow in the family line, but in a way that's very much their own. Maybe there's something to that being part of Aemon's plan. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, well, because we did bring up back in 8.1, there was some parallels between what the younger Bahames and Duchamps were doing and what Aemon and Rose were talking about.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It could be. That just wasn't the impression I got in Aemon's interlude. For sure. So there must have been some sort of development. I'm just interested to learn more about that. I mean, Sandra thought Laird was at the point where he would offer himself up as a new host to Conquest,
which is weird, right? I mean, it's interesting. It kind of recontextualizes some Arc 7 stuff, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I was sort of thinking back on some stuff, particularly what happened at Duncan's house, and trying to figure out if I thought that was like a very accurate read. I mean, obviously it didn't go ahead because Blake got in the way.
Yeah.
But, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and, I think the worst thing that Laird ever did, in my mind, was hold Blake down for his echoes to come and get him.
Yeah.
Which, with this part in mind, kind of feels like Laird almost proving himself to Conquest as a kind of reasonable henchman, I suppose. I don't know, maybe that's a kind of too much reading into it, but maybe that's what Laird's plan was. Like, help Conquest deal with Blake, and once that's done, hey, we worked well together. Why not, make it a regular deal?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, I think we talked about how potentially we did think Laird may have been a little bit suicidal when we found out he'd given the remainder of his years to his kids. And I mean, at the very least, we sort of get that kind of confirmed. Sandra definitely seems to have been on that page thinking that he was maybe not necessarily suicidal, but not...
He wasn't planning on coming back.
Right. No, he was open and not overly against the possibility of dying in Toronto.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I expect there'll be more to see about this once we explore, I guess, Rose's perspective on Jacob's Bell stuff, maybe. So Sandra and ex-Maggie, I like the name ex-Maggie, I'm going to stick to that. Sandra and ex-Maggie keep talking, and Sandra kind of basically gives her the prompt of, look, you're going to need some help to stick around in this world. Maybe that could be me, but you're going to need to find someone that's powerful enough to help you stick around.
Yeah, and we get this, it's a great little, like, reminder of who's who in Jacob's Bell, because it's been a while since we really took stock of everyone. Like people like Crone Mara and Johans, I don't think have been properly mentioned by name for, maybe 4 arcs now.
Yeah.
So it was good to sort of bring them back up to the forefront of my mind and be like, oh yeah, okay, I remember all this.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the story's coming back to Jacob's Bell in Arc 9 with whatever will be the POV after Arc 8.
Tiffany.
It's a great little way, like this talk, and I think probably the rest of this arc will be a great way to teach us more and reintroduce us to everyone in Jacob's Bell.
Yeah. So, this kind of phase of the conversation ends here, basically, and I kind of want to jump in and get our initial thoughts on how this convo between Sandra and ex-Maggie is going. It feels like it's going pretty, basically as well as it could go for ex-Maggie, but there are a few small bits that I think leave me with a few just like it feels like something could be going on here moments, right? There's a bit where the prune juice incident where ex-Maggie coughs up some prune juice and Hilda kind of snarls and hisses at her while Sandra remains composed. And anytime a practitioner remains composed but their familiar has some kind of emotional outburst, in my head I'm thinking, okay, something weird is going on here because there's a disconnect. Stuff like that just kind of leaves me with a little bit of, I don't know, something.
Yeah, well, because you don't watch the person, you watch their bugs, and that's how you know what they're thinking.
Exactly, you watch the bugs, and how agitated the bugs are shows you how agitated the person is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The cranberry juice incident to me, like, she spat out the cranberry juice and was banging the table and, like, kind of disrespectful. I'm going to give them a pass on being kind of ticked off about that because it was just kind of rude.
Yeah. But the thing is, I would understand if Sandra was ticked off, but she maintained her composure, right? That's the thing to me.
Oh, sure.
Especially when we're talking about her being genuine as kind of the emotional read that we're getting on her. Bits like that where it's like, there's still a bit of Duchamp in here.
Yeah, I was about to say, as genuine as a Duchamp can really be, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's just kind of like, yeah, she's a Duchamp, and so that's the most genuine she can be, but still kind of leaves me with a bit of like, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so practiced that it's almost more genuine because it's just her default to maintain her composure. I mean,
yeah,
it's an interesting cyclical argument you can get into.
True. But let's not. Let's keep going. Let's jump forward over that cyclical argument because the girl in the checkered scarf goes off to have a shower, presumably in her checkered scarf. And when she gets back, Sandra has set up a small ritual that they were discussing to kind of help her get a bit of a read on her situation. It starts with Maggie writing down a bunch of personal details about herself.
Yep. And before we properly get into that, I just wanted to go back to the shower scene a bit because she doesn't use any shampoo because it smells a bit different. She figures that's not really her. And this, Blake sort of went through the same thing in Arc 2, so it's good to see his head was sort of in the right spot. But again, we are drawing a lot of parallels between these two, this arc.
Yeah, true. Hopefully their expiry dates don't end in similar situations, I suppose. So, yeah, Maggie writes down a bunch of details about herself. And we start out with some ones that we already knew, and then we kind of get into some ones that are, I guess, humanizing, but not really, plot relevant, seemingly. Although it does kind of give you a vibe of, oh yeah, Maggie's a teenager. She's still kind of got a lot of emotional shit going on in her head. Yeah,
well, it's a great way for Wildbow to just quickly get to really, really flesh out the character. It's really great. We get to see all these little insights. I knew she was cool, and now it's been confirmed because she likes salty food and hates polar fleece. Yeah. So immediately I was like, yeah, great. She's smart.
Yep, of course. Those are universal cool traits. Yeah, and okay, so we were talking about things that seem fine but maybe are a bit questionable under the surface. And again, this kind of is one of those to me. Sandra has set up a situation where Maggie is writing down a bunch of very personal details about herself for Sandra to take a look at. And
yeah.
There's obviously a totally justifiable and fair reason for this. As we see, it's obviously pretty useful ritual that kind of does help Maggie figure out where she is. But again, I don't know. This is a situation that Sandra set up and it kind of puts me on edge.
I mean, at the very least, getting to read over her shoulder and see all this personal info is a bit of a perk. It's
yeah.
I mean, I suppose Sandra could argue it's a win-win.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's, the polite thing to do would have been to not read the stuff, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, Maggie writes down some intimate details, and Sandra basically sets up a little ritual where the POV is able to measure the strength of connections between Maggie and her most important things. And none of them are good.
The idea for this ritual is so cool. I love how the pen just looks like it's breaking, and it turns out it wasn't. Now I'm going to be convinced that whenever I was writing something and the pen runs out, I was writing something hollow, and the spirits are just give me an FYI. But I don't know. I love sort of the everydayness of just how the ink just kind of runs out. The way the spirits let magic in Pact be so tied into just day-to-day stuff is so cool.
Yeah, it is a very cool and very immediately understandable ritual, right? Maggie starts drawing with the pen, it runs out of ink, and she thinks, or she says, I'm assuming that was meant to happen. And immediately as the reader, you're like, oh, I get this. Immediately it's so understandable. It's great.
For sure.
So yeah, this kind of diagnosis confirms what we already knew, more or less, which is that she's basically got no good connections here. She has a pretty good connection to Blake, for now. And she also has quite a strong, in fact, one of her strongest connections is to Molly, which is interesting.
Take the name.
Yeah.
Take it. No, it's just. I mean, I'm still not convinced that she might take the name, but the Molly Ghost has been very heavily set up in this
Yep.
arc so far. Well, surely something's going to happen with the Molly Ghost, and I can't wait.
No, I don't think so. Anyway, yeah. So basically, from this, Sandra tells ex Maggie that, like, if it's a magic 8-ball, it's like chances are not good here, right? She basically should accept that she isn't going to get her name back, and she needs to make some new connections pronto, because otherwise, there's nothing holding her stone above the lake, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sandra sort of says the most likely situation in Sandra's point of view is that Podrick just gets bored and takes pity on her and gives her the name back, which is like, so not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's the most and I don't think it's unfair to say that's the most likely situation.
No, exactly. So it's really set up as like, just, don't bother. And Sandra goes on a great speech about how, when it comes to the fairy, it's just don't bother. It's never worth it. They're such fucking pains in the asses playing all their games. Just don't even.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like this thing where our POV has to basically make new friends to try and heal herself, because I mean, like, it's good writing to put your characters in situations that particularly challenge them. And I mean, even back in 2.y, Maggie was someone who was set up as a bit of a loner, and Maggie didn't really like making friends, and so of course her ultimate challenge is to be put in a situation where she has to rely on others to help save her, or at least so she thinks.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be salvageable for her to get the contract that she was going to sign with the Young Justice crew, and try and reinstate that, because I imagine one of the best ways, even more powerful than forging connections with people, is like forging like binding documents
Contracts,
and like contracts with people, right?
Well, so the interesting conundrum there is, in order to sign the contract, she has to sign a signature.
She needs a signature, doesn't she? Also, I'm pretty sure most of those people are up in Toronto right now, aren't they?
Well, the Bahame half certainly are, but it seemed like Penny Duchamp was kind of running the show, so it might still be open.
Yeah, fair. Just sign it with something else, man. Sign it with an X. Easy. Simple.
Well, I mean, you get to... she could just make up a name and try and claim it. Like, I imagine this is one of those things where if she gets everyone else... Like, if she sort of just tries to claim a name and everyone else starts using it, then it'd become real, right? Like, that seems very Pact to me. She could just start calling herself, like, the boss, and if everyone did it, then her name would just become the boss.
Yeah, although kind of Sandra does touch on some of this stuff about the fact that it's not just a name, right? So an example that she brings up is if Podrick dies and then ex Maggie takes her name back because of that, then that's the name of somebody who's died, and therefore, there's all kind of weird situations where you're kind of maybe dead now because you have the name of someone who's died. Yeah, I definitely get the sense that it's probably not as simple as just, well, maybe. I mean, getting a name that is yours, not necessarily just kind of claiming a name.
No, well, you're right. Like, I think half of it would be getting others to use the name, and half of it would be whether the name actually fits you in terms of convincing the spirits.
Yeah.
For sure.
I guess you kind of have to convince everyone that calling you by your cool new nickname is a good idea. Which, as we know, doesn't usually work out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There's like, I love all these little details about like what the symbolism behind reclaiming her name from a dead Podrick, what that would mean.
Yeah.
It's great. There was actually one point where I was thinking she should just try and claim his name, make him swap it back or something.
Give him a taste of his own medicine.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that would actually be harder to do than getting her original name back. So, not a real option. But I mean, I think the interesting little tidbit that Sandra drops here is, and that ex Maggie repeats, is this idea that she could forge other connections. Like when she says, "Oh, I don't want to make friends," Sandra's like, "I don't know, just other types of connections." And our POV is like, "Other connections, I'll remember that." And I mean, I don't know. I feel like this might be a clue. I'm worried that she's going to double down on something like goblin farming, and like really lean into like the Goblin Queen aspect of her identity, and with things like Evan, we talked about how becoming a Firebird would probably affect his personality as well. And so that would be my concern here is if she, say, formed connections with goblins or something by owning them, that would feed back into her as much as it would help sort of strengthen herself.
Yeah, I guess the first thing you think about when you think of Maggie Holt is Maggie Holt, Goblin Queen, right? So that is, or at least was, a core part of her personality. This is probably a chance for her to break that association, but I don't know if she will or not.
Well, I don't know if she should. I mean, if that's an association that's holding, she does need to hold on to it.
True.
I worry about the effects leaning into it would have on her, especially given how the arc opened up.
Yeah. So Sandra also kind of touches on something that we've heard of throughout the rest of this chapter a bit, which is that ex-Maggie is basically going to erode over time. She's destined to die. She's very much a vestige like Rose kind of situation where it's, you need something to keep you going or else you're going to expire. Of course, we can't have a main point of view character here in Pact that doesn't have an expiry date.
Yeah, well, I mean, how boring would that be? I'm just imagining like chapter 543 of Crone Mara waking up, doing her chores and,
pretending to be a child.
Yeah, collecting more ghosts, sticking them in dolls, like boring.
Yeah, lame. Yeah, fair enough. Yes. So our POV here thinks about forging some other with a capital O connections. Basically exchanges a few quick words with Sandra and sets off to face an unnamed horror. And we don't find out what they're talking about until later, but immediately, I think she just says, "Oh, I'm going to go see her. What do you think of me going to see her?" And immediately Sandra's like, "Oh." Immediately they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's a bit of a he who shall not be named moment almost. Like they don't even say her name. So it adds to the creep factor, which is very much delivered on.
Oh yeah.
As we get there, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. And Sandra kind of has this vibe of wanting to warn ex-Maggie off of it, but kind of respecting her and giving her the agency enough to be like, "No, I'm not going to tell you no, but I am going to try and kind of give you some hints here."
I mean, to be fair, her position is kind of, that's a shit plan. You should go see, like, Johann's, which is admittedly also a shit plan.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of like, not throwing stones in a glass house when it comes to having bad ideas of who you should go to. Like, there are no good options.
Yeah. Yes. So then we jump forward in time a bit and we see our POV hiking through the woods on her way to meet this unnamed monster that we find out is Crone Mara.
Yeah, and I mean, this section opens with, "Take the hardest path, story of my freaking life," which I just loved as an opener, or just anywhere in the chapter. Yeah. It's just a great little character moment.
Yeah.
And especially as she's trudging up the path, there's these moments where she's wondering, like, is the thing where she always has to take what looks like the harder path, is that a spell? Or has Crone Mara just had, like, 300 years to, like, arrange the forest in such a way that it appears that way? Like, the concept that she might have been here long enough that she's just manually made it difficult to navigate in a magical kind of way is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love from the get-go, we're kind of setting up what this interaction is going to look like. Because we obviously, this is really the first time we're engaging with Crone Mara, really. We've seen her at a council meeting. We had the vision of her at the very start of the story, but she hasn't really played any active roles. And honestly, in my head, up until this point, she was kind of just like another Briar girl, like a weird half-other, half-person thing that lived in the woods and didn't talk to anybody. And that was kind of the only picture I had of her. So I like that we get some establishment of how she actually is her own terrifying thing.
Yeah, totally. I think the Briar Girl comparison is sort of fair because, as you said, they're both kind of loners. They're both out in the forest. Like, apart from that, all we really knew about Crone Mara was she's indigenous, immortal, and Rose Senior thought she couldn't read.
Yeah.
Apart from that, like, that's pretty much it. I think we already knew that everyone was a little bit scared of her, and so that sort of sets up a bit of tension that, again, seems pretty justified.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? It gives me this feeling of a fairy tale, right? Pun intended, because it basically feels like ex Maggie is this innocent protagonist walking up to the witch's cottage, right? Even to the fact that ex Maggie thinks about Crone Mara's cottage later. It wasn't made of gingerbread, at least, which is a totally hanging a lampshade on how much of a fairy tale this is.
It's very Grimm's fairy tale, for sure. The little girl walking through the woods to find the cottage.
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, we'll get to this a bit later, but it even has a bit of a, like, morality play kind of vibe where the moral that ex Maggie learns here is be careful who you're helpful to, I suppose.
So, but no, like, I totally agree. There's this sense of adventure, or that has too many positive connotations. There's this sense of a bit of an epic journey going on that you're right, like, invokes fairy tale type imagery.
Yeah. So ex Maggie finds her way to Mara's cottage and knocks on the door and is greeted by a young, captive, chained up child who is seemingly a kind of like a assistant to Mara, Mara's executive assistant who goes around doing chores, basically. This child invites our POV in, and they kind of just start chit-chatting while they wait for Mara to return.
Executive assistant seems like a very generous term, but... So, okay, I am jumping ahead a bit here, but ex Maggie gives us the lay of the house because it's very claustrophobic and seems really dark. Not like in the terms of lacking in light, but in the terms of creepy as fuck.
Yeah, I mean both, honestly.
Well, yeah. And there are two bedrooms. Ex Maggie points out that there are two bedrooms, and that's interesting because who's the second bedroom for?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess
I mean, does she have more guests than Sandra? Like, because Sandra needs to reevaluate some stuff if that's where her social circle
on the weekends. She hosts a local D&D group. No, I don't know. You're right. It's an interesting question and one that isn't really answered this chapter. But yeah, you're right. Maybe we'll kind of keep it in mind and see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm interested. Well, and the girl talks about how she has lessons all the time, and obviously now that we based on what we learn later, I'm like, but wait, lessons?
Yeah, what
from who?
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
I don't know. There's something going on here, I think, and I can't wait to find out what.
So I want to read out, I think, my favorite few lines of this chapter, where ex Maggie thinks she'd halfway expected the interior to be a domain, but there was no guarantee that Crone Mara would hold to any recent traditions. The notion of the domain had come over from Europe with the settlers. Crone Mara predated, which I really like because the domain is like the fundamental symbol of power, right? Like throughout the story, all the most powerful practitioners have had their area that's their domain, right? There's Laird's house, places that get infiltrated. There's, the Thorburn house, of course. To an extent, there's Conquest's Tower, which isn't really a domain, but it's kind of close enough.
It's a similar sort of idea. Johann's, like, obviously, the only reason he's a big deal is because he somehow claimed a huge chunk of the town.
Exactly, right? And the fact that Crone Mara predates the idea of domains and therefore doesn't need one to be powerful is just like a great way of flipping the idea of domain equals power on its head and being like, no, Crone Mara is very, very powerful and she's completely outside the system that you understand, so don't think that you know what's going on here.
Yeah, well, it kind of ups the horror in a way, right? Because it's like her not needing this big source of power reinforces this idea that she's like older and more mysterious and has like alternative forms of power, and it adds this mystery and creepiness to her status.
Yeah, at the risk of this word honestly losing all meaning, it gives it an otherness, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so ex Maggie talks to this slave girl who kind of is asking her for help and kind of starts revealing that her situation is pretty bad, and tries to get Maggie to help her set her free by breaking this chain.
I hate it.
Yeah, creepy.
I hate it.
Creepy. It's creepy the whole way through. I don't think there's a single point of this where your hair isn't standing up, right? Even the idea of helping this slave girl, you're kind of like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean that's what's so tormenting about this. Like, even just reading it, I'm sort of like, I don't think Maggie should do it, but it's like
Yeah.
a little slave girl. So like, how am I at the point where I think that's like not a good idea?
Yeah. And of
Yeah.
course the reason is because sticking with the kind of fairy tale theme, this young girl is not what she appears to be. And ex Maggie puts that together, realizing that this young girl is Mara, just kind of playing a very fairy tale-esque trick.
Mm.
You know what Mara does here that a lot of other practitioners do is using kind of ambient effects to escalate tension on traps, which I really like. Mara sets off these singing creepy dolls that are just kind of making the room more intense and really making it feel like ex Maggie has to give an answer now, which is of course the exact same thing that Podrick did at the potato diner, and Laird has done. Laird and Duncan have both kind of had ticking clocks, literally. But yeah, ex Maggie doesn't fall for it a second time, which is good.
Yeah. I mean, Mara also keeps sort of interrupting her as soon as she sort of tries to rationalize why she shouldn't help. So she is really sort of lumping the pressure on.
Yeah. So ex Maggie figures out the trick, luckily doesn't fall for it, and then basically says to Mara, hey, is there any way that we can figure out a deal here? And Mara's like, nope, never going to make a deal with you. And ex Maggie's like, all right. And steps back outside into the cold to go to her second choice, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's kind of almost hilariously abrupt.
Yeah.
We've just sort of gone through this kind of epic journey to get to the house. She solved the riddle and cracked the puzzle in the house, proving herself, and then it's like very anticlimactic. It's like, no reward for you, get out. And she's just like, well, okay.
Yeah, and it makes me think about why this section exists, right? Because obviously it is a whole thing. It's half of this chapter is getting to be able to say to Mara, hey, can we negotiate? And then she just turns her away immediately. Potentially Mara will continue to be a part of this chapter, but I actually think that the reason is this is her first choice. Like, this is the first person she goes to. And I think Mara is just here to set up how terrible her other choices have to be if this is her first choice. Like, this creepy old lady who clearly wanted to screw her over and had almost no chance of helping her. That was the first choice. So God knows what the other options are going to be.
Yeah, I think even more than that, as I sort of touched on, the practitioner formerly known as Maggie is on a journey to find herself. Like, not herself, her, self.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not just setting low expectations for her other options, but it's really setting up how big a task this is. Like, this isn't something where she's just going to go and get a quick fix, is sort of what I took out of this. Like, even if she goes to Johann's and stuff, I don't think it's going to be that simple. Like, and that kind of makes sense. It's a bit weird to go to others in a quest to define yourself. So I wonder if sort of the going to others will kind of be a feeble part of this exercise, or maybe something that directs her into how she actually wants to do it. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think it's fair that this is we're kind of setting up the fact that she's obviously never going to get her original name back now, right? Like,
yeah,
not just that.
I've completely given up on that. I think she's getting a new name, maybe Molly. But I definitely do not expect her to be calling her Maggie Holt anytime soon.
I do like the practitioner formerly known as Maggie. Maybe that's my top pick for new way to refer to her, although it's just as cumbersome as the girl in the checkered scarf.
I was about to say, the reason I gave up on the girl with the checkered scarf was because it was taking too long to type. The practitioner formerly known as Maggie is no better.
Yeah, true. Anyway, that's the end of our discussion about Signature 8.4. Before we wrap up the show, though, we thought it would be fun to pull out a discussion question, which I always love to do because everyone who reads this story has such great, interesting ideas of different things that could happen or different kind of historical contexts, and I always love finding out about them. This question isn't going to be a historical one, but more of an analytical one, I suppose. We're thinking about what Sandra has brought up this chapter, which is basically that making a play for the lordship of Jacob's Bell is going to happen soon. And of course, out of story, we know that Conquest has just kind of been deposed, so that's probably only going to make it more likely that this is about to kick off. And so the question that I want to ask people is, who should be Lord of Jacob's Bell?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I can't wait to see what people think. I mean, go nuts, kind of, in who you think it might be.
Yeah.
Or should be, sorry, not might be.
Sure.
We're not asking for predictions, because I'm presuming a lot of you listening
there is a way to easily
happens.
find, but I am interested to hear, obviously there's maybe like half a dozen key players in Jacob's Bell that are probably up for the lordship, right? We've got Sandra, we've got, I don't know, Johannes, maybe Duncan will make a play.
Butt sack.
Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. I want to hear some of the more out there answers, right? I think Barbatorum might be an interesting Lord of Jacob's Bell. Butt sack again is a good one.
Be a lord? Like, I feel like the whole point of a lord is they're part of the system and they're stable, and I feel like that'd be anti.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, I'll leave that to the listeners.
I want to hear a compelling reason why it's going to be the Ghost of Fell as the Lord of Jacob's Bell. Anyway, so Elliot, where should people leave their answers to that discussion question?
Well, in the notes directly below this episode, wherever you're listening / watching to it, there is a link to the discussion thread on Reddit, and that's the best place to put those answers.
Yep. Now, if your answer is 140 characters or less, which it shouldn't be, you can also tweet it at us. Why not? Or just post it in Reddit is probably better. But if you want to tweet at us, you can do that. We have a Twitter. It's @MediaMDPodcast.
There's also a website for Doof. That's doofmedia.com, and that's where you'll find out about all the other shows on Doof Media, and there's a bunch of them, and they're all really good, so you should check them out. Yeah,
it's probably worth pointing out that as people are listening to this, there'll be an episode of We've Got Ward coming out the next day, and I think that episode is actually going to be live recording today. If you are a patron of Doof Media, you will get access to the live stream, and you can see how the sausage gets made, so to speak, see the recording session live, and kind of experience it before anybody else gets to.
I've managed to tune into a few of those. I mean, it's hard, obviously, because for us here in Australia, it's during the middle of the workday.
Yep.
But I've managed to get to a few, and half of the fun of that is like the live chat. There's sort of everyone else who's watching the live recording. You get to engage with them, and it's really fun. Yeah, it's kind of a companion to the recording. Yeah, getting to, sort of live react with others to what Matt and Scott are talking about is really fun. Yeah. So if you want to get access to that, go to patreon.com/doofmedia. Speaking of great perks, there really is no perk better than being able to read all these great stories. And that's a perk of people donating to patreon.com/wildbow. Now, you don't have to, but Wildbow only is able to do this because some people do. So maybe if you have the means, you should do that too. 100%. I think everybody who reads, Worm or Ward or Pact or Twig kind of has that feeling of, I have to recommend this to another person, right? Think of the patron as your way to recommend Wildbow's stories to more people, because of course they only exist because people support him. So if you want to nurture that recommending itch that I'm sure everyone listening to this has, support Wildbow on Patreon. Yeah, so apart from that, I think we'll see everyone on Friday, the 19th of July for 8.5. See you then.